some of the observations we've had over the last week or so here on the internet. And first of all, I guess this isn't a new one. In fact, I elected to show 90 days of activity. This is scan probes on port 1900 UDP. John, I think you had pointed out in the past that this is one of the vectors that at least has been anticipated as a potential reflection attack amplifier.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep.
It's associated with a simple service discovery protocol, which is a part of universal plug and play. I think our bigger concern here is in the context of reflection attack activity. Now, it's our belief that a lot of this sort of periodic scanning activity that's sort of stable, it's sort of the same height and has been going on for some time, is associated with a sort of a good actor group looking for potential sites that might be used for this to help with notification processes and shutting down potential reflectors that might be used for DDoS attacks. But some of the more recent activity here, we see some spikes of activity. We had seen some previously from China. More recently, we're seeing some spikes coming up from Russia as well. So those are perhaps not the same. They are, obviously crossing international boundaries, not necessarily the same interest in mind as some of the ones that we're seeing. In fact, these other ones, the more periodic ones, are in the United States and predominantly, I think, scanning addresses in the United States for notification purposes. Next item here is somewhat related. Again, this one's a little bit different because it is scanning on TCP 53, but ultimately I think it has to do with looking for DNS servers. There may be another motivation, and maybe not just for reflection attack activity, because you need the UDP protocol ultimately, but usually where there's TCP 53, there's UDP 53. This may also be associated with trying to identify, basically help me Dave, the domain recursion.
Yeah. Being able to do domain transfer.
Like zone transfers?
Zone transfers, yeah. Right. So to get information about authoritative servers and what domain space that they're serving for. Mm-hmm. So that can be used in a variety of situations, and that's one possibility of what might be taking place here. Next one here is scan probes on port 7071. This particular port, I think, is actually registered to another application, but in this particular case, I think the most likely use for this port in this context, that is to be scanning for it, is probably with the Zimbra admin interface. Now, Zimbra is actually a collaboration or messaging service platform, and this happens to be the administrative interface for it. There are a lot of other interfaces. There's a web interface and message delivery interface and some others. So this is potentially looking for those types of servers, perhaps trying to get to the administrative interface, maybe to get to access to information that's being posted there. There's a good possibility somebody using this application might be, might have a collection of intellectual property, some collaboration activities that aren't open to the internet. I'm speculating on that point. But the probes here are from a single source in China, and it has been occurring a number of times, which suggests perhaps that they've had some success and are continuing with that. Now, we haven't seen a significant growth in that activity, so we'll have to see how this progresses over time. And the next item here, scan probes on port 9000 TCP. This is actually registered to CS Listener. I'm not exactly sure what CS Listener is. Everybody's shaking their head here. So I did some digging around and did find some commentary, and I'll emphasize this commentary. I haven't verified this information, but they did say that it's possibly associated with the media access port on some closed-circuit TV DVRs. That is what we often refer to generically as security surveillance camera DVRs. Now, we know that there's been a lot of activity to go and exploit these DVRs. This could be, in fact, going after a different product brand or a different product type. And in this particular citation that I found, they did identify a very specific product that was associated with this port. So I think it's credible information. I just didn't have the opportunity to verify it. In any case, these probes, most of these probes are coming from an anonymous hosting service provider in the Netherlands. And so that kind of suggests further, just the fact that it's coming from an anonymous service provider, the hosting provider, suggests perhaps there may be some nefarious aspect underneath the covers here. There has been some sort of regular probing going on in the past, but what we're seeing here is actually a surgence of more significant probing, more probes that are taking place in shorter periods of time and more frequently. Next item here is Stan, you probably weren't born when we saw this originally. But this is a case, Dave, I'm sure Dave remembers. This is port 1434 UDP. That's the Microsoft SQL database. And they're actually, oftentimes we report 1433 probing, doing password guessing attack activity. But this is a particular case that's associated with the traditional, what we've called the slammer worm from some time ago. This was around 2001 or something. It was way back. Yeah. But in this particular case, what we're seeing is, in fact, that telltale sign. It was a 404 byte packet payload that was actually the executable that was able to exploit machines and cause them to go off and scan others. And I think it also provided an avenue to be able to get into the machine also, although that was not the original intent of the slammer worm, if I remember correctly.
But it was UDP, so you didn't have to establish the connection, and that's why it propagated so quickly.
It propagated very, very quickly. In this case, it's not propagating as quickly, but we certainly are seeing some significant activity and very geographically diverse in the sources of activity, which suggests perhaps that there are some unpatched servers of that type that are just kind of scattered about around the globe. Okay, so the next item here, we're going to look at top 10 most probed ports, and this is actually specifically from May 12th. Top of the list here is port 22 TCP. We've been talking about this one, and it's sort of the siblings of that we've been talking about for several weeks now, actually months now, a few months now, are port 23 and port 5000 TCP, all of those associated with devices that are being exploited. We have wedged in there port 445 TCP. And then following that, 3389 TCP, that's remote desktop protocol. We see port 80, port 8080 TCP typically. We just talked about the Microsoft SQL database. In this case, 1433 TCP being probed for most likely password guessing attacks. And then we see 53 UDP, which is probably associated with reflection attack activity or probing around looking for DNS servers. And then last but not least on here, port 443 TCP, which may still be associated with, they may be simply looking for web servers, but could be associated with looking for Heartbleed, the vulnerable servers associated with Heartbleed. The last what we'll look at here is the daily reconnaissance index, and you can certainly see a change in trend in activity over the last year here. This is looking at just a little bit over a year of activity, showing, we had sort of some stability, and then we got some certainly some increase in activity more recently. Not at the peak of what we've seen, but we are seeing still some increased activity taking place.